Okay, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and potentially good evening. I'm Ismail. I'm joining you today from France, even though Megan's French is probably better than mine. So thank you for signing up for today's workshop. We're really excited, to meet you all and hopefully learn some stuff together as we explore the world of podcasting and hopefully learning together today and coming out of today's workshop with confidence, inspiration, and ideas to create change in the world that we want to see. So my name's Ismail. I'll hand over to Chitira, the co-host today of today's workshop.
Thank you so much, Ismail. Hi. I'm so excited to be here today, and it's so wonderful to see so many people joining. We're really excited to really get to know all of you better and hear any questions you might have. So we encourage you to ask questions in the chat, and we'd love to keep it interactive as much as possible. It's a pretty intense 2-hour session because we've had to pack a lot into our 2 hours. But let's get right into it. Like I said, my name is Chitira. I'm joining from Kerala, which is in South India. So while we wait for just the last few people to join us, I'm going to take you through the interpretation and Zoom housekeeping rules. A gentle reminder again that interpretation is available in English, Spanish, and French. Please look for the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen if you'd like, and choose the channel of your choice. Also, please remember to mute your microphone when you're not talking, because so that we can hear the speaker clearly. Please feel free to turn off your video if your connection is slow. Please speak slowly so that we assist our wonderful interpreter friends who have joined us today. Feel free to rename yourself in the chat to add your name, where you're joining us from, the language you are listening to us in. Feel free to add any and all information you feel comfortable sharing. And finally, a reminder and a request that we'll be recording the session. So if you'd like to keep your video off or change your name to reflect for more privacy, feel free to do that as well. All right. So back to you, Ismail.
Thank you, Chitira, and thank you in advance to our wonderful interpreters today. So as Chitira was mentioning, we like to keep the session a little bit interactive where possible, but there is a lot to get through. So please forgive us if some of it seems a little bit less interactive. And we thought we'd start with a little interactive session, if I can get it to work. And because today's show is about tech, today's workshop is sort of technology minded. In the chat, you will see a link to a Mentimeter, which is a sort of a poll chart. So we just kind of get an idea as much as possible who's joining us today, where you're joining us from, and some other things. So please go ahead, if you can, click on that link or scan the QR code of the instructions on there. If people can see if this is working. There we go. So I'm going to take us through. So hopefully you may have joined up. Put a thumbs up if you're connected, if you're in there. Please feel free to mention in the chat as well if you have any issues getting in there. I see some thumbs up going up. There's 3 in there, 4. Numbers are rising, thumbs are floating. People are joining. This is great. Okay. This is good. Amazing. I like that. So I'm going to move on. If you have any issues, please also feel free to write answers to these questions in the chat as well. So where are people joining us from today? So we've got people from Germany, Nepal, the Netherlands, Costa Rica, England, Spain. Any other places? Carlos Alfaro, buenos dias. Nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us. South Africa, this is great. So we're covering a good swathe of the planet. So also be interesting if you could go on to the next one, just to know what language you're joining us in today. Are you taking part in English, in Spanish, in French? There's a lot of English. Bueno, Español and French. I presume we will have some more people joining as well as the session goes forward. This is a good 50-50 split, English, Espanol, a draw. It'd be interesting to share a little bit now. 3 words that kind of describe the work that you're doing, the kind of issues that you're working on, or the way that you're approaching your work. It could be anything. It could be something, an adjective. It could be a noun. So for GFC, maybe we would write something like, working on forest, gender, feminism, advocacy. So we have communities, forests, gender, advocacy. All the words I've just said, it's like magic. They're coming on the screen. Biodiversity, policy, children, communities. This is great. I think there's a lot of linkages we can see here between the groups that are joining us today. Cambio climático, excuse my accent, derechos, rights, air quality, pollution. This is great. So I think we can see a lot of synergies developing across the work that we're doing. This is going to be exciting. Next question, a little technical here. So there's a little picture there of a kind of headphones and the name of Audacity, which you will learn about today. It'd be interesting to know how much experience people have. It might be video editing, it could be photo editing. This is great. So we have some and none. So this is a good cross section. So maybe you can share, some of you who are clicking on the some or algo can share some of your experience as we go through today. And then finally, how are we feeling about today's session? Nervous, excited, apprehensive, curious, great word. Too curious, apprehensive. People are copying my words. This is good. It's a difficult question to answer, really. Okay, this is great. Don't be apprehensive, though. Everything's going to be straightforward and as simple as possible. Happy, nice. So we will make this as simple and straightforward as possible. As I said, hopefully after today, we'll come out with some inspiration, motivation, and confidence to be able to just put out our own podcasts out there. And it'd be great to hear a bit more later from everyone about the different podcasts that you're listening to. And also maybe you've already done some work or been interviewed before on podcasts. Okay, so that's great. Thank you everyone for taking part on that. I'm keeping an eye on the chat where possible. And also Karina was not introduced earlier, but feel free to message on the chat if you have questions, raise your hand if you would like to speak, and also ask questions or join in. So sorry for the long start there. I'm just going to quickly give an overview of what we're going to be doing in today's session. So as you may have seen in the emails and the information shared before, this is over 2 sessions. Session 1 is this week, where we'll be going over kind of thinking through an overview of how to go about planning a podcast. All of the thoughts that need to go into that, who we're doing that podcast for, why do we want to make a podcast, and then also going into some of the more technical aspects of that, including an introduction to the editing and technical side of that. Next week, we'll be doing more of a kind of overview and review. There will be practical task that will come up, and we'll share more about that with you later. But today, as I mentioned, we're going to go through introductions, trying to understand three main areas, really. Thinking through why we're making a podcast, what do we have to think about as we develop it, and then some of the technical skills needed to do that as well. I'll be doing the first part, and then Chitira will be sharing her expertise over the second half of today's session. So we're about to get started into this. Is there any questions in the meantime for now, or anything people would like to raise? Feel free to write in the chat or unmute yourself, even if you have anything. If not, we'll just sort of jump straight into things. Okay. So first of all, I think it would be just to mention also the slides are available here in the chat. So if you would like to access these slides in either Spanish or French, please see the link in the chat, and you can do that, and you'll be able to look at those slides at the same time as we have them up in English on the screen, if that's helpful for you. So yeah, please go to the chat and download those now in PDF format. We thought actually would be quite an interesting thing to start off with is just look at some of the podcasts that we listen to, you may listen to. So we've highlighted a few here that interesting for a number of reasons, and some of the things that we like about these particular podcasts are potentially the content, the issues they're raising, the way that they're presented. So if you go to these links should work. Sorry, excuse me. So if we go to this HBF one here, the tipping point. So one of the, sorry for the technical issues. This is always my Achilles heel. And now I'm on the wrong slide, I think. Sorry. Here we go. So here, this is just one podcast that we've sort of highlighted and looked at before. But it's called The Tipping Point. And if you see here, one of the key things that I think helps it get exposure, it has its own particular website to go to where you can go through. It's very well presented. It's clean. It's available on iTunes, Spotify, Deezer, SoundCloud. So there's lots of different hosting sites where you can access it. They're covering really quite a varied range of issues. So if you click on one like that, you would go to the site, and then from there you have excerpts, you have ideas, so you know what's in the podcast, and then there's a click directly through that gets you to the podcast. I know, Chitira, you shared one on here that you were particularly sort of interested about, and if you want to share a bit more on the Suno India podcast.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Suno India is one of the, in my opinion, best podcasts to come out of this part of the world, this subcontinent. They are editorially independent, which means they cover stories that are underreported, underrepresented, and deal with a wide range of structurally marginalized people's issues. It's multilingual, which is very interesting because most podcasts tend to stick to one language because you want to build listenership that comes back to you for every episode. But there's multilingual to reflect the fact that in India we have more than 300, 400 languages really. And they also have a dedicated website. I'll share that with you in the chat box if you want to give it a listen, because it's an interesting way to understand how to have an interdisciplinary podcast. For instance, they talk about climate issues. The week before last, they talked about greenwashing and how it contributes to climate misinformation. This week, they were talking about some of the ongoing communal rights in the northeast of India. They talk about gender, they talk about tech, they talk about cultural issues, science. So they really are a great example of how to start envisioning what you want your podcast themes to be. Share that in the chat box.
Thank you, Chitira. I wonder if there's anyone else here who would like to share maybe a podcast that they like It doesn't have to necessarily be connected to your work. You can feel free to unmute. You can share in the chat. But yeah, does anyone else here today have a particular podcast that they think would be useful for others to listen to, or to share a bit more about which podcasts they really like? Don't be shy. We're all friends. But if not, you can feel free to share in this chat throughout as we go along. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the slides here. So I think now we might as well sort of kick into gear, get into things. So everyone should have been sent by email this introduction to podcasting worksheet. I don't know if you can see the video. Karina should be able to share in the chat right now. It's available we have it in French, English, and Spanish. And this is the worksheet that we're going to be using to kind of think through all of our individual podcasts that we will be putting together. If that could be shared, I'm holding it up here. But yeah, so the key objective here really is for us to sort of think through and consider the kind of key question really is why? Why do we want to make a podcast? Why do you want to make a podcast? What is the objective of that podcast? What are we trying to achieve? And thinking it through these questions on this worksheet, trying to understand also who we're trying to interact with in this podcast. Who's our target audience? Who do we think are going to be listening to this? And thinking through all of those, hopefully, will help us narrow down some of those key questions about the content, the style, where we're going to be putting it out there, what language it should be in, and all these kind of things. So if you could go to that worksheet now, please, if possible, you can open it up on your computer, or you have it on a device next to you. But the first question really here on that worksheet is, what are your organizations or I don't know if you might be doing this as an individual, you might be doing this as a representative of your community or part of an organization that you work for. Will you be doing this on your own or with colleagues in the organization? These are all questions that we will talk through today. But first of all, what is your mission or objectives? So, in the case of GFC, our vision really is this, as it's written down for the organization, is a symbiotic coexistence of people and forest ecosystems for a sustainable quality of life for existing and future generations, where the rights and territories of indigenous peoples and local communities and the traditional knowledge, sustainable livelihoods, and inclusive gender-just governance systems are restored and conserved. It's a lot, but basically looking forward is a future where ecosystems, knowledge, and rights of current and future generations are protected. So that kind of helps us understand what we're trying to achieve. So if you have a mission or vision or value of your organization, if you put it down there in number 1, please also, Navia, thank you for sharing, to create awareness in your region. Awareness of what? If you don't mind sharing, and feel free to open your mic if you want to talk. It would be great to hear your voices.
Yeah, hello.
Hi, Navia.
This is Navia from Lebanon. To create environmental awareness.
In the region, so the broader region?
Yeah.
Yeah.
From Lebanon in the Middle East.
Okay. That's great. So that's a very clear. So awareness raising. So if we get that kind of takes us into number 2 on the question on the sheet there, which I hope people have. And thank you, Navia. I really appreciate you opening up and speaking in front of everyone. It's very helpful. Carlos is saying it's requesting access. It should be free to download. So you might need to edit. You might need to request edit access, but if you can download it and then work on your own, otherwise everyone will be writing on their own sheets. Megan says it's updated. So yeah, so what's the main purpose? So raising awareness could be one. It could be just sharing success stories or mobilizing support for a particular cause. And this takes us to number 3 as well, which is kind of connected, where we're thinking about what we're trying to achieve. So you may be trying to achieve, as we have here, so ideas, inspiring action. Do we want people, do we want to inspire movements? Are you trying to get the public behind particular causes or issues? Or are you really looking at maybe trying to target policymakers and trying to get them to enact specific policies or take specific actions? Or are we trying to inspire new ideas or new approaches to issues? Are we trying to educate or bring knowledge to specific communities, people? Yes, Anatoly, if you can fill in this worksheet, because this will be as you go through, or you can, if you don't have the worksheet, you can take down notes on a piece of paper, you can write it down somewhere. The idea is that if you go through this today, hopefully by the end of today, you'll have all the building blocks needed to try and take your podcast idea forward. But these are really the questions that we need to ask. Why? What are we trying to achieve? I don't know if anyone else has any other specific examples that they have thought through what they want to achieve. And again, this is just the beginning. You will have time, obviously, to go through this further and think through in more detail. We're a bit rushed in the short session today, but this is trying to inspire kind of some thinking, questions, and ideas. I think with that, we can move to the next section, if people have already filled in as they've gone along. So on question 4 on the worksheet, we're trying to list the potential stakeholders, you know, or the beneficiaries, really. Who's going to benefit from the podcast, the information, the work that you'll be putting into this? Will it be specific community members that will benefit? Will a specific community benefit from it? Will it be civil society organizations? Are there other groups that you work with that you feel would benefit from being able to hear and share the stories that you might be sharing on your podcast? Or maybe it's the scientific community or media. Will media and the larger public be more aware of the issues? Will they understand what are the specific situations or impacts on the ground? You know, how greenwashing activities are impacting particular communities in specific areas, and what are the specific and real impacts of these? That might be one of your ideas of who would benefit. I think for GFC, you know, what we're hoping to achieve with the podcast that we've been launching recently, trying to build a kind of common understanding and awareness among broader civil society organizations, as well as also potentially donor groups who are often don't hear the real voices on the ground, and may not have a true understanding of what the situation is amongst different communities, and also trying to build understanding about some of what we call, you know, the greenwashing or false solutions that are being perpetuated around a lot of the policy discussions at the moment. And then another thing to think through as we go there is trying to identify who do you think would be listening to your podcast if it was published? Who would be who do you expect to download this? Who would listen to this? You know, and that might help you think through what that content would look like. And also, as we get onto next week, I think, and a little bit later, how you're going to market and try and share the word about the podcast that you're developing. I don't know if anyone else has any ideas to share or contribute here. I don't know if Chitira has some thoughts or also ideas to share about, you know, the different target audiences that these podcasts may reach and how to think that through.
I think you've covered everything, Ismail. All good.
Thank you. So if you see there's 4, 5, and 6, this is something that we don't need to complete right now in full detail, but hopefully you'll take this away and think about, okay, well, who will listen to it? What is the demographic? Are we trying to target specific communities, specific individuals? And it can be more than one, of course. So Navia, again, I like that, targeting the youth, young generation. That is very good and very specific, because I think that would definitely feed into the style of the content, right? And the way that you're putting it together. Maybe you would try and make it, youthful. It would be music. Maybe there would be, something kind of energetic about it, and not too academic in a sense. So yeah, I think it's really, really important to have that idea, because that will then help you narrow it down. Because when you're going into thinking about a podcast, it could be so broad. And I think, as Chitira will get into later, really narrowing it down into specifics is so important, because it's very difficult to have an engaging topic discussion when you don't have that kind of narrow focus of what you're doing. Another task, which again we can do through young women, Clemence, very important as well, is really, really useful. I don't know if you want to add a bit more about that. You feel free to contribute and open your mic. You don't have to. There's no pressure, of course. But if you feel like you would like to, we're more than welcome to share. And I don't know if any others also have specific ideas in mind about who they would try to reach with their podcasts. But this is really, really inspiring. And I think these are really useful contributions. So thank you, Navia and Clemence and others. So as I said, don't have to finish this right now. This is just to get you thinking about the building blocks, the basics of your podcast. And then the kind of final part of this section is looking at ways to, and please forgive the NGO speak that would come here, but the kind of how to have some kind of identifiable or quantifiable objectives that would kind of, again, keep it focused and narrowed. So say, as Clemence was saying, targeting young women. So maybe what would be the quantifier? It would be the number of downloads or interactions with the podcasts by young women. And you could set a time frame from that, that you would hope to have accessed or reached at least maybe 100 women through your podcast over the space of 3 months, say, for example, or 6 months. If you had different, so the youth, going back to Navia's interaction, would be really useful. And maybe one of the quantifiers there would be the age range of listeners somehow, which might be difficult to gauge. People don't need to list their ages, obviously, when they download, but there may be ways to see on social media or something. Maybe shares by social media of people of certain demographics would be a useful quantifier. So again, thinking through how you would try to keep an eye on and a measure, because that will help you track whether something's working or not working. And again, through all of this, I think one of the key things would be getting feedback. So maybe you would be able to share it with some youth that you know and get some thoughts and feedback from them. And that really essentially is the first building blocks and steps to trying to figure out what will be the content of that podcast. Why are we doing it? What are we trying to achieve? What is our objective of putting this podcast together? It could be just to raise the profile of your organization, potentially at first. Try to build awareness of the organization and the work that you're doing, if you're doing this as part of an organization. Or again, it could be something far more specific and narrow, which would be to, the overall objective would be to increase the young female interaction or action within specific issues in your country or in your region. So I hope this has been helpful. Is there any questions or anything people would like to say now before we kind of move on to the next step of today's workshop? Please feel free to raise your hand, open your mic, share more about your ideas. If not, then I think I'll hand it over to Chitira. Chitira, do you want me to stop sharing my screen, or should I continue to do the screen sharing?
I can take over screen sharing.
Okay.
Actually, I think you have one more slide to go and then you will pass it.
Oh, yes, sorry, you are correct. You know, almost got let off the hook, everyone. So if you look, as I say, so basically what you have here is those first 10 questions on the worksheet. And hopefully you will go away over the next week or two and put together a little bit more of a detailed thought. And it'd be really useful if Chitira, myself, and others would be very happy to receive that and then give some feedback on that and help you think through in more detail, putting together a kind of more concrete plan for your podcast. So really, if you could write a brief summary that would kind of bring those questions together, you know, identifying who's the target audience, what are the goals that you've set for your podcast, explain a little bit around the reasons why you've chosen that target audience, and how it aligns with you or your organization's mission. And then also, as I said, those specific goals or metrics, if you could just list one or two of those, I think it would help you really, it definitely would help me, it would help all of us be very, you know, almost controlled in the way that we're putting together the podcast. Because without that, without that kind of framework, it can be easy to just go off and do things on a little bit of a whim, and it may not be as effective as it could possibly be if it's a little bit more structured and organized and thinking through what are we trying to achieve and how can we measure that. And it really, because as I say, and this is the last thing I'll say, the options are endless in creative work. You know, you start with nothing, so you could really do anything. So being able to think these things through will really help you plan something and execute it in a way that would be really, hopefully, impactful and effective, and something that you'd be really proud of producing. So with that screen, Chitira, I do hand it over to you. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ismail, for that solid introduction to how to start framing your podcast and for thinking about your audience, your numbers. And yeah, I second the opinion in the chat box. The explanation is excellent, right? And the ideas are wide enough, which is why people are not sharing new ideas. Well, yes, but we look forward to hearing from you, and we're very excited to hear the podcast you share with us. As you will see from the worksheet, what we are requesting from you is an audio file that's between 3 to 5 minutes long. That's it, okay? Just so that we get a sense of what you've picked up, how you've transformed the ideas we've discussed today into a tangible project. Right, so I'm going to start sharing my screen. Just give me a second. Yes, I hope you can all share my see my screen. Yes. Okay. I'm gonna. There we go. Okay, I hope all of you can see my screen. Okay, so now we're going to enter the more technical aspects of podcasting, okay? And I'm going to structure this in 2 parts. The first part is going to be my presenting to you information about the equipment that is sort of really the best equipment out there in terms of both cost effectiveness, in terms of quality, in terms of user reviews. Like, what are some of the really good, reliable, headphones, microphones, devices out there that we can recommend. The second part of this will be talking about how to podcast if you have none of these things. Okay, because the first part of this, really presenting to you some of these names and some of these products, is really to say, you know, if tomorrow, if one of you goes out and gets yourself an excellent grant for podcasting, and you actually have the funds to buy a lot of, you know, some of these products, we wanted to give you a resource that you could reference, that you could come back and say, hey, I have, you know, 10,000 euros. Now let me go pick up a Blue Yeti microphone, you know. So this is more meant as a resource. We know that many of us, including those of us at GFC, don't have this equipment, don't have the resource to buy this equipment. Trust me, you can still have a full-fledged, high-quality podcast without any of it. But here's your information anyway, just in case. So this is an overview of what you would need if you had the resources, the funds for it, right? The first is, of course, a microphone of some sort. This is very important because it's what picks up your sound with clarity. And there are basically two types of microphones out there. The first is the USB type of microphone. The USB type of microphone is basically anything that has a you know, the kind of charger that your phone has, the USB charger, sort of plugs into your laptop, your device. That is the first type of microphone. The other type of microphone is the XLR microphone. Those are independent microphones. You don't need to plug it into a computer or anything. They just work independently. They just need a source of power. USB microphones are easier to set up because if you have a computer, you just can plug in your microphone to your computer. But the sound is often not as clear as XLR microphones. I've listed some of the popular USB microphones and some popular XLR microphones. If you ever need to come back and reference some of those. Moving on to headphones. Headphones are very useful also because they let you listen to exactly what your listener will be able to hear when they are listening to your podcast. If you just listen without headphones, if you just listen to the audio from coming out of your laptop, for instance, you will be hearing it with all the background noise. You will have, you know, your family members, your pets walking around you, and you might not know exactly what your listener will pick up, right? So headphones help block our background noise, so you can edit better. I've listed also some popular headphones there, if you ever want to pick one up. Okay, moving on to finally recording and editing software. This is a third and the you know, most important equipment, software that you need to produce podcasts. Unlike the other two, the headphone and the microphone, we cannot do without editing software. We absolutely need one. But the good news is some of the best ones are free, as we will be learning more today, right? In today's session, we'll actually be taking you through all of the basics that you need to know about how to edit using Audacity, which is one of the best free and open source editing softwares out there. We'll take you right through installation to actually editing. There are also other editing software out there like GarageBand, Adobe Audition. If you have a Mac, an Apple computer, you might have GarageBand already. If you don't, like I have a Windows computer, so I downloaded the free version of Audacity and I use it. They allow you to record, edit, and mix your audio. And they also have a variety of features that help you improve the sound quality of your recordings. You can remove background noise, you can improve sound quality, and all of these things. As promised, here we're gonna move on to how to do all of this if you don't have any of the equipment. How do you record and edit a podcast if you don't have any headphones? Nothing. Okay, this is what we use. So we at GFC have a podcast, and we use the following method, which I'm going to go into now. All right. Okay. Right, I'm gonna share my new screen. Okay, I hope you can see my new screen. Right, so this is the procedure for recording and preparation of a podcast, which we developed at GFC because we did not have the resources to buy expensive equipment. And also we felt that we decided to keep it as low tech as possible because, of course, politically, we believe that podcasting needs to be accessible to as many people as possible. And in order to do that, we have to make it accessible in all the ways, right? In terms of costs, in terms of the kind of technology we have at hand and everything. So we sort of pared all this, everything that we talked about today down to a much simpler version. Okay. Including the editing, like I said, even our editing software is that we use the free open source editing software. So what are the things you need to record a free podcast? First, you will need a strong and reliable internet connection. This is especially true if you are recording your podcast online. For instance, we at GFC interview our members who are all over the world. And it is not possible for us to visit each of them and record in person, right? We can't record directly from them. So we speak to them using Zoom. So in order to do that, we do need a strong and reliable internet connection so as to ensure good audio quality, okay? Second thing, which is we highly recommend, is you have a phone. Just a phone that you can put on airplane mode to make sure that you will not be disturbed for the duration of the recording. You want to keep your phone right next to you, like I would say about 30 centimeters away from you, right next to where you're sitting down to do your recording. So if I'm sitting at a table, I have the laptop in front of me where I have the Zoom call going and I have my phone right next to it, okay? Third is, of course, like I said, the laptop on which we have the Zoom call. So for instance, if I'm interviewing Ismail for the podcast, I would have Ismail on call on the Zoom platform, okay? Now, I ask all of our interviewees to sit in a small, quiet, indoor spot where they will not be disturbed for the duration of the recording. This is to ensure, again, that the podcast, that everything, all of the important things that our speaker, our interviews are saying is captured clearly and fully, right? It is great if you have a headset with a microphone attached, but this is not mandatory. We have not used any of this so far. We've just done it just with a laptop and a phone. Okay, now, what do you do right before the recording? You go into a small indoor space and you shut the windows and the doors. Okay. Quick side note here, when I say a small indoor space, it should not be as small as a bathroom, for instance. This is because when you're in a very tight space, the chances of echoes are very high. So you want to be in a small room, ideally, where you can close the windows and doors. It's also great if you can draw the curtains around you. If you have any curtains, if you can draw them, that's great because it helps dampen outside noise and also keeps your voice from being too sharp and too shrill, kind of muffles everything. Sort of related to that, if you can surround yourself with soft items like couches, pillows, if you have a cloth or a rug or a carpet you can put down on the floor, all of this works really great to absorb sounds. And it also helps muffle any noises you don't want, right? Before you start speaking and you can request this of your interviewee as well, is to warm up your voice, right? Speak out loud for a few minutes, sing. You can sing. Actually, I highly recommend singing, like open-throated singing, few notes, just belt it out so that your vocal cords are ready also, because for the duration of the call, you don't want your voice to be sort of clogged up and you don't want to be stuttering. So you Just open out your whole chest, take some deep breaths, really helps. While you are recording, try not to do a lot of like moving around. Don't move too close to the laptop, too far away. Wherever you're sitting, try to sit in a comfortable position so that you can stay more or less in the same position for the next, say the recording is for half an hour. I highly recommend staying that way. So that your voice levels also stay the same. Like if I come close to the laptop, I'm way louder, right? If I go further back, I'm softer. So you want the voice to be at a steady level, so you don't want to be moving around a lot. And now, finally, right before the podcast recording begins, I mentioned having a phone next to you, right? Put your phone on airplane mode. Now, what's the purpose of having this phone? Get it right, get into that. So what we do here at GFC is we record the Zoom call. So if me and Ismail are on the podcast recording, I will start the recording. I'm assuming most of us already know how to record on Zoom, but we'll share documents that go into all the technical details, of course. But there is a record button, as you know, right? You've noticed how all our meetings, we record them. So what we do similarly for our podcast recording is we record the call. So you already have one voice file, right? Which has both the interviewee and the interviewer speaking. So you have one audio file ready. Now, I'm sure all of you know that we can't trust all technology blindly. Anything might happen. Your laptop might crash. You might run out of, you might lose your files. You might accidentally erase the recording. Maybe Zoom didn't record it properly. So what do? You can't go back and ask the person to like re-record the whole interview, right? It will be horrible, very unprofessional. So that's where the phones come in. Right? So this is our way of having a backup file. So what we do at the start of the podcast session is I will start the recording on Zoom. If I'm conducting the interview, I will start the recording on Zoom. Then I will ask the interviewee to do the following. All phones generally have a native voice recording app on it. Okay, so I have an Android phone and I have something called a voice recorder, which comes pre-installed on it. If it's not pre-installed on your phone, you can install it. There are free apps available, hundreds of free voice recording apps available. So you want to download one on your phone. And right before we start the interview, I ask the interviewee to start their voice recording app on the phone. And I do the same. Okay, and I ask them to connect the phone to their charger, if possible, so that we know that the phone won't run out of charge in the middle of the interview. And then I ask them to press the record button on the phone recorder as well. So what happens? Even if we lose one of the recordings, say the Zoom recording didn't work out properly, what we have is I will have a recording of everything I said, which my phone will have recorded. They will have a recording of everything that they spoke, very clear, very crisp recording because their phone was right next to them, right? So they'll have that file as well. So what we have is we will have both of these files as well as a backup. If we lose the Zoom recording, we simply edit these two files together. And it's not very complex, as you will see in the editing section. It's not very difficult. So that way we make sure that we don't ever lose that podcast recording. Okay, so as you can see, it's not very complicated. We purchased nothing extra. I already had a laptop, thankfully, and I already had a phone. And those are the only two devices that we used. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the technical note. And we'll share this technical note with you in English, French, and Spanish, so that you also can follow this procedure if you want to try it. Let me just go back to my slides. And yes, so that was basically the roundup of the three low-tech and accessible format. Do you have any questions? Does anyone have any doubts they want to clear? Feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. Okay. If you have any questions about the procedure I just described, just feel free to ask.
I was going to say that Megan mentioned that you can go under your covers on your bed.
Yes. Yes.
A soft voice.
Yes, exactly. That's a wonderful method, especially if you are willing to stay that way for the duration of the interview. You can stay in your closet. I have to say, I tried this for the first recording that we did, but I had to stay standing because there was no way I could sit in my closet. So yeah, I didn't. So yeah, this is definitely something to try, especially if you're recording little snippets. Perfect if you can get under the covers. Thank you, Megan.
Sumina
We
has
have
a
a question. Yes. So do you ask the interviewee to record the interview on their phone too? Great question, Selena. Yes. I do the same thing for my audio, and they do the same thing for their audio. On their phone, their audio will be very clear. Everything they said will be very clear. And on my phone, my audio will be very clear. So at the end of the interview, what I ask them to do is I send them a link to a Google Drive folder, and I ask them to either upload their recording onto it, or I ask them to WhatsApp the files to me, or I ask them to send it to me in any way, that recording, so that in case we lose our Zoom recording, we have this when editing. So yes, so we have 3 recordings simultaneously. My phone, the interviewee's phone, and the Zoom recording. Great, thanks, Amina. Any other questions? Is it beneficial to have additional person by the interviewer as well? Could you clarify that question, Clemens? Do you mean one more person to help with the tech support? Is that what you mean? I would not recommend this unless this is somebody who can be very, very quiet throughout the duration of the recording. You want to try and sit in a room by yourself. And unless, of course, they really absolutely need help with the tech, then yes, somebody can go in and set it up for them. But it's always best to be recording in a room by yourself. Okay, so yeah, because the chances of somebody knocking into something, walking around, very high when there's another person. But yes, feel free to have someone go and set up the tech if needed. But then ask them to leave till the end of the recording. Is that clear? Did I answer your question? Any other questions? Okay, great comments. Any other questions about the technical aspects? I hope you all can visualize the scene in your mind, right? How it looks when we're sitting for recording. Another quick question. This could be a bit far-fetched, but is it possible to shadow you whenever you guys do a podcast? We could definitely talk about it, but like I mentioned, this is all done remotely. So I'm sitting in India and speaking to somebody who is in Togo. And then, Ismail in France is editing it. So all of us are basically, if you shadow us, all you will see is just us sitting in our rooms and our laptops. For the other kind of podcast, right? Like I've also done podcasts where I actually went out and recorded from the field. I went out with a recorder, I went out with my phone or a recorder, and I recorded directly from the field. Then I think it is great if you can find somebody who's doing that right now to shadow them, because we'll get into it in the subsequent sections of today's presentation, in fact, but there are a lot of things that additional tips and tricks you can do to make your podcast more alive and more full of color. So yeah, for sure. But we'll discuss it. Let's see if there's some way to figure out how to share maybe the process. Okay. Ayuska has a question. Just to clarify, so the audio file from the interviewee's phone is usually small enough to WhatsApp. That's a great question, Ayuska. This depends on how long the interview was. So sometimes I call someone just for a quote, right? I just want one answer for them. Maybe it's like a 3-minute response, in which case, yeah, it's often small enough to send via WhatsApp. If it's not, say it's a 40-minute interview, then it's definitely not going to be sent via WhatsApp. It's going to be sent via Google Drive, or it's going to be sent via Dropbox. Another way to send this file is through, I'm sure many of you have already heard of an app called Telegram. Telegram is a phone. Yes, I see that somebody's put that in the chat. Telegram is something that works exactly like WhatsApp. It's another WhatsApp in a sense. You can download it for free, just like WhatsApp. And Telegram lets you send enormous files. People share films, 5 GB movies on it. You can and more actually. So sometimes I ask the interviewee, especially if they already have Telegram, to send it to me via Telegram. You just need to have an account on it. Oh, great to hear that, Aiska. I'm so happy that this workshop is useful. Great. Any other questions? Or we can go to a brief 5-minute break. Any questions? Okay, looks like we've clarified all doubts, and now you are all experts. No, just kidding. But I think, but feel free to reach out, to email Ismail or me with any other questions you might have. Feel free to reach out to us, right? Even after this workshop, I mean. But I think, yeah, this is a good point to take a short break. We request you all to come back in 5 minutes. Like we said, there's so much to cover, and we're trying to keep to time. So it would be great to see you all back here in 5 minutes. Thank you so much for listening. We shall go to break. so we all begin to come back. You all are back. If you could drop a hi in the chat again so that we know we can proceed, that would be great. Or if you want, you can turn on your video for a second so we know you're back. Whatever works best for you. Hi, Ismail. Right, Imina's back. Gonna give it another minute for people to wander back to us. Bersha's back. Yes, a thumbs up is great. Megan is back. Our interpreters are back. Gael. All right, I'm seeing more thumbs, more and more thumbs. Great. It's pretty noisy in the background here. We have, it's a lot of birds are talking to each other because it's dusk evening time here. I don't know if you can hear this.
Not a good time to be recording a podcast, Chitira.
Definitely not. Clemens is back. I think most of us are back. So let's continue because we have so much to cover. Okay, welcome back everyone to second part of today's session. This is going to get more into the technical aspects of editing. Okay, so editing seems like a daunting task for many. Looks because we think it requires a lot of good equipment and a lot of know-how, technical know-how. But I'm here to assure you that really do not. Like I said, we'll take you from A to Z of installing the editing software to editing a file and then turning it into a format that you can upload on your podcasting platform. Okay. The first part of this editing tutorial, I'm going to play a recording. And the second part, I'm going to try and do a live editing session with you on Audacity. I hope the audio comes through clearly. If not, I'll just continue playing the recording. I'd rather do the live one, but let's see how it works out. Okay. So I'm going to take you to a recording. Right. Stop sharing. Please let me know if you can see my screen. I hope you can see my new screen. Okay. I'm gonna play a recording for you so that you can see everything about how to install Audacity, which is a free editing software we're going to be using, which is the one we use for our GFC podcast as well. So here we go. First, you're going to watch this recording that I made. I'm going to turn up. Right, I'm going to slow it down so to make it easier for our interpreters. Let's get right into it. So today we're going to cover all of the basics in this session that you will need to know to do basic audio editing on Audacity. Audacity is a free and open source software that you can use to edit your audio files and your recordings. Audacity works on any device, which is to say whether you have an Apple computer, a computer that runs Windows, or a Linux computer, right? So you can use Audacity on any of these, and it is very simple to use, as you will see. So first, we need to install Audacity on my computer. And I do that by typing Audacity into my Google search bar, which brings up the Audacity homepage. All right, now this is Audacity's homepage, and here on top you will see a tab that says download, and then you'll also see a drop menu which lists the kind of system you want to download Audacity for. So if you have a Mac, you should be clicking Mac. If you have a Linux computer, you should be clicking Linux. I have a Windows computer, so I'm going to click Windows. Now you have to do nothing because Audacity will install on its own. As you can see, I didn't click anything, and it's installed the program it's downloaded the program onto my computer. Now I'm going to open the file where it is. There you go. And I'm going to double click it. And it'll ask me whether I want to allow this app to make changes to this device. And I say, yes, please. Select the language you want to use during the installation. I would like to use English. There are many options. As you can see, there's Spanish and Farsi and French and lots of options here. I'm going to choose English. And then you click next. You click next again. Make sure that you have at least 7 to 3.1 MB of free disk space. More would be ideal, of course, but at least this much space on your computer before you install Audacity. You click next and you say yes again. And I have asked it to create a desktop shortcut so that it's easy for me to find my Audacity interface. There we go. And then we say install. There you go. That's it. And then you say finish to exit setup. And then I would like to launch Audacity. So I say finish. This is the Audacity interface. Now, when you log in, you will see a little pop-up like this, which has a quick help manual, tutorial, and how-tos. If you don't want to see this page ever again when you use Audacity, you can say don't show this again at startup, which is what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to dismiss this pop-up. Now, the second most important thing you need when using Audacity is something called a plugin. A plugin called FFmpeg. Now, the name of this is, you don't have to remember this name. It's all there in all the documents that we've given you. But the reason you need this plugin is that it allows you to edit a wider range of audio formats. For instance, your phone might be recording in an M4A format. You don't have to remember these technical terms, but by installing this plugin, you allow Audacity to play with and edit more file formats. So that's all you need to remember. And in order to do that, I'm going to go back to Audacity's webpage, and then I'm going to type installing FFmpeg. And then I say search. Okay. Now it brings up a page called plugins. I'm going to click plugins. And then on this page, I'm going to scroll down, and then I find it here. The FFmpeg, a library to import and export various media formats such as M4A, WMA, and MP4. These are some of the most common file formats, which is why it's important to install this plugin first. Now I click that link. Okay. Again, it brings up a page with where you choose whether you have a Windows, Mac, or Linux computer. I'm going to play the second recording. There we go. Let's begin. Now again, because I have a Windows computer, I need to choose the Windows tab. If you have a Mac computer, you should be Sorry, let me just reload this page. It seems to be having some technical difficulty. Clicking here. Now, I have a Windows computer and I have to click this link right here. I'm just going to restart that file because it's not playing properly. See, this is why we said you can't trust technology all the time. Sometimes it hold on. Now it's playing. 1 second.
Now I have a Windows computer and I have to click this link right here.
If you can listen to my voice, I can give you the background. I don't think the recording is playing properly, but basically when you click that link, it brings up this page where you download the file format that matches your computer. So for instance, I have a 64-bit Windows computer. So I click the link for my 64-bit Windows computer.
That.
Yeah.
Now I go to the downloads folder and I click on that file, double click that file, and I allow the app to make changes to my computer. It brings up a setup box where I say I accept the agreement. And I click install. There you go. And that's it. Now you have your Audacity and your FFmpeg plugin ready to go, which means you are now ready to play around with Audacity. Okay.
Right. So since we're having some sort of technical difficulties with this recording, I'm going to try and show you how to edit live on Audacity. So please let me know in the chat if you are able to hear the files that I play. I'm going to stop sharing this and I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Right. I hope all of you can see my screen. You share audio as well. Yeah. All right. Perfect. Now, we've installed. So what have we done so far? We've installed Audacity and we've installed the FFmpeg plugin. Okay, both of these will send you tutorials again on how to do it, just in case you want to go through it again. So now you're equipped with all the software. Now, how do you actually do this? On my desktop now, I can find the icon for Audacity, which is, you'll see a pair of blue headphones with a fiery audio file in the middle. This is the Audacity logo. So you double click that and it brings up the Audacity interface. This is the Audacity interface. And it looks very complex at first, but you don't have to worry about any of this. Like I said, we're going to show you exactly everything, absolutely everything you need to know to record and edit your first podcast. Okay. The only things you need to look at right now. Can you all see my screen and where my cursor is? Can you also hear me? Please let me know in the chat if everything is coming through clearly. I hope you can. Nobody's saying anything. Okay, yes, perfect. Okay. Yeah, you can never trust tech. See, this is why you need like 4 backups of your podcast. Okay, so in the top left hand of the screen, you will see 2 lines. That's a pause button. You'll see a kind of grayed out play button. You'll see a square, which is the stop button. And then you will see a red button, which is the record button. Okay. So now, first of all, we're going to try recording audio directly onto Audacity. Okay. Let's try that. So I'm going to click this red button. Hi. This is my first recording on Audacity. And then I click this stop button. Okay, now can you all see these little blue squiggles that appeared on the screen? That is your audio file. There you go. It's as simple as that. You open up the interface, you click the red button, and you can record the audio file. Now let's play it back by pressing, see now the play button is green again. So when you click that, you can listen to the audio.
Hi, this is my first recording on Audacity. And then I click this.
Okay. Were you also able to hear the playback? Did you just hear were you able to hear the audio file I just played? Okay, perfect. Great, that's excellent. Thanks for being so interactive, all of you. I truly appreciate it. So you recorded, like I said, you recorded your first podcast. There it is. There's my first podcast right there on the Audacity screen. All I did was press this button and then click stop. Okay. So now this file is ready to be edited. It's ready to be mixed. It's ready to be uploaded. Okay. If you want to. When is this useful? When is it useful to record directly onto Audacity? When you want to record the introduction of your podcast, right? You're back home, you finished gathering all your interviews, you're back home, you want to record the introduction to your podcast, you want to record the closing of your podcast, you want to record the little connections, right? So after one interview finishes, you want to say, thank you so much to our previous interviewee. Now we're going to move on to the next interview. So when you want to record these little interjections, that's when you want to record directly onto Audacity. Now, this is only one part of the story. What's the second part of the story? The second part of the story is when you want to import and export audio from somewhere else onto Audacity. Import and export sounds very technical, but all it means is taking a recording that exists somewhere else, like for instance, your phone, right? I went out into the field. Say I went to the beach close by. I went out to the beach and I recorded a podcast there with the communities who are losing their housing because of climate, because of sea level rise. I've just gone out there and I've recorded a podcast. Now I've come back home. I have the recording on my phone. How do I do that? How do I take this file that is on my phone and put it into Audacity for editing? That's going to be the second one, right? So in order to do that, first, I will click File in the top left corner of the screen. You can see File. You click that and you click Open. And it brings up my Downloads folder where Ismail very graciously had sent me an audio clip of his to use for our editing tutorial. So it's already in my Downloads folder. If it's, how do you get it? How do you get the audio file from your phone to your device? Again, you can do it through WhatsApp. You can send it in an email to yourself. You can send it via Google Drive. You can connect your phone via a USB cable like I have here. You can just connect your phone to a USB cable, plug it into a laptop, transfer the file from your phone to a device. And here it is. Here's the file that we're going to be editing today. Now I double click this. And there you go. You've imported your first file onto Audacity, right? Now let's listen to Ismail's voice.
Hi, this is Ismail, and you're listening to the Podcasting for Change workshop. But I want to delete this bit. Now Chetira is going to show you how to edit. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Ismail, for that audio file. So if you heard in the middle, again, you can see the blue lines here, right? This was the audio file. This is where Ismail's sound was captured. And if you heard, there were also some knocks in the background, there was some disturbance, there were some technical issues, right? So now we don't want all this going into our podcast. We want to delete all of that and have a clean file. How do we do that? So we play the file.
Hi, this is Ismail, and you're listening to the Podcasting for Change workshop.
As you're listening, please follow this green downwards arrow that is right here. You can also see a line moving across the screen, right? That shows you where you're listening to. What is the point in the file you're actually listening to? So for instance, if I click my mouse here, and I play from here.
But I want to delete this bit. Now Chatira is going to...
Did you hear that? So that marked the point. This marks the point where Ismail has said, this is the part I want to delete. And then there's some background noise. So what do I do at this point? I click Control B. Control B. Again, don't worry about remembering all this. We put it all in documents. We'll share it all with you in all multiple languages. But basically, you want to click Control B. Now, you want to click B. B for box. Yes. Thanks, Sumana, for asking. B. We'll send you all the resources. Now I'm going to press play again.
But I want to delete this bit. Now, but I want to delete this bit.
Right. So now I want the point after the two knocks. You can kind of see where the two background noises are, here and here. After that, I'm going to mark another point. See, it changes to a little hand, as you can see. So again, I press Control B to mark the 2 points that mark the section I want to delete. So this is the beginning where I want to start the deletion. This is the point where I want to end the deletion. Now, as you can see, when I move my cursor to this point, kind of changes to a yellow line. Can you see that across the screen? There you go, yellow line. I click that, hold the mouse button down, drag it to the next point. These were the 2 points that marked with Control B. See when I move it directly, changes to yellow. We've marked out the section we want to remove. As simple as that. We just held down the mouse and dragged it, and there it selected it. Now, what do? Very simple again. Just press the delete button on your keyboard. That was it. You've done your first editing of your first recording. Now let's listen to the whole file again and see how it sounds.
Hi, this is Ismail, and you're listening to the Podcasting for Change workshop. Now Chatira is going to show you how to edit. Thanks for listening.
And there you go. You've done it. We've taken out the background noises. We've taken out the part where Ismail says, this is the part we want to delete. There you go. Now, this edited file exists on Audacity. How do you take this and put it back in your phone? Or how do you put it on a podcasting site? How do you upload it somewhere? First, you need to export it, which, like I said earlier, is just a fancy word of saying, how do we take it out of Audacity into a usable file format? 2 things, just 2 steps. First is, see these 2 points we had marked earlier? This was the points we wanted to delete. We've deleted it. We're done. You come to the left of this box where you will see a tiny X. Can you see this little X where it says labels? I click that X and it removes that box altogether. We no longer need those points. We're done with it. This is your final file. How do we save it? You go into File, again at the top left of the screen, and you come down till you see Export. When you hover your mouse over Export, you see Export as MP3. We highly recommend exporting as MP3 because it gives you the smallest size file while preserving audio quality, which is very important, right? If you make it too small, the audio quality will be terrible. And if you make it too big, it's going to be impossible to carry this file around to upload it because most podcasting platforms only allow a certain size, up to a certain size. So we highly recommend exporting as MP3. You click that, and I save it on my desktop as, so this was the original name of the file that Ismail sent to me. But I want to mark that, I want to make it clear that this is the edited version. So I'm going to add the word edited, just so that it's absolutely clear to all that this is the edited version of the file. And then I click Save. Brings up a little box which asks me to edit metadata tags. We don't need to get into this right now, so just say okay. You don't need that, okay? And there you go. You're done. You've edited. You have not. You've installed Audacity. You've installed FFmpeg. You recorded your voice directly onto Audacity. You imported a file. You edited it, and you exported it. Now let's listen to the exported file of Ismail's voice. Now, when I go to close Audacity, it asks me if I want to save the project before closing. click yes only if you have to go back and edit the project again. Like for instance, this is done. I'm done. This was my first podcast. I'm done. This was it, right? So I don't need the project file to exist anymore. If you want to work on this file on Audacity longer, you can say yes and save the project. But in this case, I've already exported the MP3. I don't need this file again. I don't need this. So I say no. Then, oh, this is the other file. I don't need to save that either. And here is the file that we had edited, is my voice for editing tutorial _edited. Let's listen to it and see how it sounds.
Hi, this is Ismail, and you're listening to the Podcasting for Change workshop. Now Chetira is going to show you how to edit. Thanks for listening.
And there you have it. That was the edited version. The background noise is gone. That section is deleted. Okay. Yes. So that brings us to the end of the editing tutorial, of the basic editing tutorial. I see there are some questions in the chat, and thank you, Ismail, for responding to them. I'll get to them in a bit later in the Q&A in the final section as well. But thanks, Ismail, for handling them for now. I'm gonna now go and continue the session. Okay. So we have reached. We've cleared the editing section of today's like I said, we've covered all of the basics you need in terms of editing to create your first podcast. Okay, so now please go ahead and put your doubts and questions in the chat. We'll get to them later. Now we're going to move on to the next section. This section will handle how to choose a podcast format and structure, and how to identify podcast formats that align with your organization's objectives. Okay. Now, what does this mean? There are lots of podcast formats out there, which we will get to soon. How do you choose a format that you want? How do you decide if you want an interview podcast, for example? Do you want to be interviewing other people? Do you just want a podcast, a solo podcast, where you sit and talk and you hold forth about your own thoughts? Do you want a podcast where you have many people speaking at once? Do you want a podcast where you go out and speak to community members and recorders? How do you decide all of this? This is all going to be in your worksheet, so don't worry about remembering this process right now. But first thing, most importantly, you want to define your objectives in terms of what you want to achieve with your podcast. Are you trying to create a podcast that educates your audience? Are you trying to build a relationship with them where they keep coming back to you for more information about a particular topic? Are you trying to build support for a movement, right? Second thing to consider is, who are you creating your podcast for, right? What are they interested in? Earlier, we talked about how to identify your audience member. Think about what kind of content they want to hear, right? Do they want to hear a lighthearted podcast? Do they want to hear a highly researched, very, very documentary style podcast? Then that's the kind of podcast you want to be creating, right? But of course, the main thing is you need to also think about your resources. Maybe you want to create a very, very detailed documentary style podcast, but that would mean investing a lot of time and a lot of money into it, right? So maybe then you will have to keep it simple. Maybe you'll have to be an interview podcast, which is a format we do at GFC, right? We speak to people, we speak to experts, forest defenders on the ground, we speak to indigenous peoples on the ground, and listen from them. We learn from them about what is happening in their areas. Then you want to consider your expertise, which is, what are you passionate about? What do you know a lot about, right? Because if it is something that you're learning on the go about, then that's going to sound obvious to a listener, right? If you have a podcast about climate change, but you're not really sure about the science and you're not up to date about climate change, it's gonna come through. If you're not passionate about it, it's gonna come through. So you want something where listeners are they can sense that this is something that you know a lot about and really interested in. And finally, all of this is true, but also feel free to be creative. And ultimately podcasting is through and through the creative endeavor. So you might discover your voice slowly. You might start with a solo podcast and discover that actually it's better when there are other voices as well. Then you might change that. So work with it, see what works best for you and for your audience. Again, as Ismail pointed out in the earlier part of the session, it's good to keep an eye on, okay, here is what people are responding well to this episode where I spoke to many people really responded to that episode. So maybe I should try and do a couple more of those episodes. Just keep it fluid and move with that. Okay. Right. Now, how do you choose the right podcast format for you? Like I said, the first podcast format is the interview podcast, right? Which is what we do at GFC. So we interview somebody, we speak to allies, you can speak to experts on the ground, and it's very useful if you want to connect with other movements to build global networks. Because if you think about it, so if I interview somebody who is working as part of another organization, and then I share this podcast on our social media, the other person will also share it on their social media, which helps build a symbiotic relationship between us, gives both organizations more exposure. More people will learn about the issues that each of the other organizations is covering. So excellent, right? So interview podcasts are fantastic to build relationships with key people in your field. Then there's a solo podcast, like I said, where say you are somebody who's very knowledgeable, you're a community leader who knows a lot about a particular topic, or say climate change. You can start a solo podcast where you are the only speaker. Perfectly fine. If you can keep things interesting, and some of the most popular podcasts in the world are solo podcasts. So don't look down on this format at all. It can be excellent. Then is the conversational podcast, where it's structured there is no structure actually, or less structure than the interview, where you might have one interviewee or many, and everyone just sort of sits around. It doesn't have to be in the same physical place. Again, we could all be interviewing people who are in different parts of the world just on their own microphones. And everyone it's like hanging out with a group of friends who are talking about something, about a particular topic. They're discussing an issue that caught their attention. And it's a more informal structure. Very useful, again, for certain kinds of topics. Finally is a documentary podcast I want to talk about, which is a more complex format. It uses a long-form story structure to talk about a compelling message or a particular story. Like, for instance, when I want to interview when I mentioned the story about the communities who are losing their homes to sea level rise, that's a great topic for a documentary podcast. You go, you meet the people. It's like a story. You introduce the characters. You learn about their lives. You learn about the stories. So and then it gets you invested, and you follow it along like a story. You hear directly from the people who are affected, and so on. So these are the four basic formats. There are of course more, but these are the four main ones. Some of the additional factors you want to keep in mind when choosing which of these formats you will be choosing is to consider the size of your audience. If you have an enormous audience, you can consider a more structured and more polished format if you'd like. You want to consider your budget, right? Some interview podcasts are obviously going to be way cheaper than a documentary format. Find your time commitment, right? Documentary podcasts are going to take a lot of time to edit because there's a lot of sound, mixing, editing, all of these things and then you're going to be going on the ground to record. Greater time commitment. You're going to structure the story and all of this. So again, you consider these additional factors also when choosing your podcast format. Now, what are the main things that you want to do when you develop your podcast concept? This is, of course, the heart of your podcast, right? What is your podcast about, right? So first is to do your research. When you say, I wanted to, again, going back to this example of the coastal community, for instance, say I was planning to go this Friday and interview them for the podcast. But then doing my research and I read in today's newspaper that the local MP or member of parliament, local politician of that area is going to be visiting the place on Saturday. So I changed my recording. I changed my plan of podcasting on Friday to Saturday. Why? Because I will get to interview the politician, which will add a whole other dimension to the story. I will be able to capture what people say and think about the politician's response. All of this adds a lot more color, more dimension, depth to your story, right? So do your research, find out the history of the place, find out the history of the people, look into the, depending on what you want to focus on. Very important to create an engaging story. Decide on the length of your episodes, the format of your episodes, and the guests you will be interviewing. All of this will develop when you do your research. You will know what works best. In general, I would say don't make it too long because as we know, attention spans in general are shrinking. So we want to keep it as tight as possible. A lot of mistake that many podcasters make is in order to appeal to as broad an audience as possible, they choose a topic that is too generic or too broad. This often backfires because most listeners are intrigued by specific angles, by specific interesting ways of phrasing, by like, oh, okay, climate change for, if we just say a podcast on climate change, people are not going to be interested because there are many podcasts out there about climate change. There's a lot of information out there about climate change, right? So you say indigenous people. What do indigenous people think about climate change? Listening to indigenous people, listening to women. So give it a specific angle to make it more interesting. One way of thinking about all of this is to frame it as, what would someone tell another person about my podcast? This is helpful. It's helpful to phrase it this way because you want to take yourself out of the equation, right? And you think, because you want to think, okay, if somebody were to be describing my podcast to somebody else, how would they describe it? What do I want them to focus on? And then develop on that. Do I want them to say that it's funny? Do I want them to say it's interesting? Do I want them to say that I cover topics that are not found anywhere else? Then I need to add that in, right? Here are some basic things to keep in mind when crafting your podcast. One is to start with a strong hook. What's a hook? It's how your podcast begins. That's where you hook your audience, kind of like a fish. So you want to hook them in the first few minutes. If you don't have a strong opening, nobody's going to listen past the first couple of minutes. Second is to keep your episodes focused. Again, don't make it too generic or too broad. Choose one topic and explore it in depth. Always leaves your listeners wanting more. Leave some, ask a question at the end that you will answer in the next episode. Leave a point of curiosity for them to come back to you for. Tell a clear and concise story, right? Don't tell a convoluted story. Just simplify things. Here are the 4 points that I want to address in today's podcast, and then make sure you hit all 4 of those points. The next one is very important. Use vivid language and imagery, right? Why is this important? Because your listeners are from all over the world, and most of them are never going to see the places you're talking about or the people you're talking about. But you want them to be able to see it in their mind's eye. Okay, so they have to be able to see. When I say sea level rise, when I describe the houses that are going on, I want people to feel connected to the people here, right? So you really want to use language that helps do that. Create suspense and intrigue. This kind of goes back to what we said earlier, but leave cliffhangers. Don't answer everything. Say, for instance, at the end of this podcast, I might say, while during our visit, we also met the local the local politician. To find out what he said about this, come back to us next week to hear the details. Create a cliffhanger that makes people think, oh, I should go back and listen to this podcast again. And finally, this I think goes back to a question that somebody asked in the chat earlier, is about sound effects and music to add atmosphere and excitement to your story. When I go to this coastal area, I will add the sounds I'll record the sounds of the waves, record the sounds of the seagulls, I'll record background sounds of people talking, I'll record any protests, chants, the slogans that people are saying. So I'll try and capture the energy of the place, right? Now, so we've covered all the things that you need to do around the podcast. Now you're actually there, you're really there, you're on the ground, and you're interviewing people, or you are sitting in your room at your computer and you're interviewing people. How do you conduct an informative and compelling interview? The first is to ask elicitive, open-ended questions. What's an elicitive question? Elicitive questions are questions that do not have a yes or no answer. So for instance, instead of asking my interviewee, do you believe in climate change? Because that has a yes or no answer. They can say yes or no, and that doesn't lead to a very interesting response. You want to ask something like, what are your thoughts around what is happening here? When you see the sea rising, when you see the water entering these homes, what is the first thought that comes to mind? And then I want people to take it from there. I want people to have a more complex answer, more interesting answer than just yes, it's climate change, or no, it's not climate change, right? Second is to be respectful of different perspectives. Everyone you interview will not necessarily will be in 100% in agreement with you, especially if you're interviewing. If you're going to have like 100 podcasts, it's going to be difficult to find people. It's also going to not be very interesting if you only interview people who 100% align with you in every single way. You want to learn more as an interview, as a podcaster. You have to be open to hearing different perspectives. You don't necessarily have to agree with them. You don't have to change your perspective, but you have to be respectful of it, because you don't want to leave your interviewee antagonized or angry at the end of it, because sometimes the other side's opinion adds a lot of depth to your story, right? To hear what the others are saying. Like for instance, you go somewhere where there's mining is happening, and then you speak to somebody who works in the mine. You might not agree with what they say about the mine, but that perspective is important to the story. You want to capture that perspective. Don't leave it out just because you don't agree with it. And finally, be concise, okay? Don't let your interviews go on for too long. It is going to be very difficult to edit it down. If you have a 1-hour interview and you have to edit it down to 5 minutes, you're going to lose a lot of time. So try and keep it crisp as far as possible. Save a lot of time and effort, okay? Continuing on from that, help your audience, ask questions to your interviewees that will help your audience understand their area of expertise. Based on this will depend on what their credentials are, what experience they have, what are their specialities, so to speak. Ask questions to your interviewees that will help the audience understand their perspective on the issue. What do they think about the issue? What are their concerns? What are their hopes? Ask questions that will help your audience understand the challenges and opportunities facing the community, right? You also want to ask questions that help your audience learn from your interviewee. What advice do they have for others? What are their hopes for the future, right? You want to capture as much of the knowledge of your interviewee and sort of sift it. You want to kind of distill it for your listeners. And that actually brings me to the end of our interviewing and our technical slides. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But I think Ismail, if there are no other questions, it's going to be over to you. So I hope that session was helpful, everyone. Please let me know if you have any doubts. Like I said, feel free to reach out to us after this workshop as well. Okay. All right.
Thank you so much, Chitira, for that really, really informative, engaging session. Really, really well done. I know a few people have had to drop out because of other commitments, but this session is being recorded and we will share that with all participants again afterwards. And as we mentioned, also all the documents, detailed information. It's a lot to take on board, but as Chitira mentioned, the purpose here is really not to be overwhelmed. Everything is within your grasp. Everything is possible. And also we're here to help you with questions that you may have after today's session as well. So yeah, thank you again, Chitira. Thank you again, everyone else who's been participating. But sorry, do not leave yet. There's more to come. I just will share my screen for a second here because as we know, this is over 2 sessions. This is session 1, and we will have session 2 the same time next Tuesday. So please, stick with us for a few more minutes. We should be able to finish on time, which is remarkable and quite exciting. And I hope everyone is appreciative of that for Chitira really keeping things on time there. So I'm going to share my screen one more time for you here. Okay, here we go. So this should bring up the slideshow. Here we go. Is that showing for everyone?
Yes.
Great. So just to mention here, so to really, as mentioned before, so we've learned a lot about the concepts of the podcast, this longer term thinking, and I would urge everyone to take their time on that before rushing into really producing something, because I think there's a lot of really useful information in there. There's the worksheet, which we'll share with you. You can go through this with friends, colleagues, others as well to help you think through really developing this concept. And next week in session 2, we'll spend a lot of time talking about how to, market the podcast, how to get it up onto a podcast site. How do you actually make it possible for people to download and listen to your podcast? So we'll cover all of that in next week's session. But to finish today's session, as I said, please take some time to think about those sort of longer term things in terms of content and audience and goals and objectives. But then there's also that really crucial stuff that Chitira helped us understand, which is the nitty gritty, the little bits, which to some may seem a little bit daunting, but as you'll see, you get into it. It's really within everyone's capacity, and I have utmost confidence that everyone can do this, depending on having, but you do need a computer, a laptop. It's not something you can be doing on your phone. It needs to be done on a computer. So there's a little task to go away with over the next week, and we really do encourage everyone to please try this. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could be as simple as Chitira showed today, which is just editing one voice thing. You can record into the Audacity program itself. But basically what we are asking you to do is to put together a small audio file, edit it on Audacity, export that and send it to us. So as being shared with you in the chat as well, this takes us to, there's a practical task sheet which talks you through and walks you through. It's in French and Spanish and English, and walks through exactly what you want to do. And it could be anything. It could be a mock interview. You could sit there with someone at your computer and record it straight into Audacity, or you can try with your phone and do the recording and export the file and put it and then import it into Audacity. You could try and do some music. You could record some nature sounds and edit those together. It could really be anything. It's more about practically trying to use Audacity. The links are there in the worksheet directly to download Audacity program, as well as also the FFmpeg add-on, which you will need if you wanted to be importing MP4 files. So the task really there is to record that content, edit it, and export it into an MP3 file, please. And then either upload it, there's a link down here, to the Podcasting for Change drive. So that's literally, you can, I'm on a Mac, so it's a little bit different, but it would be here. So if you had your file, you could drag and drop it into here from your downloads folder, or you can add new and file upload. Click on file upload, and that will take you to your downloads window or your folder. I don't know what you call it, this one here. And then you would be able to click on, okay, so say it was this one, I would click on that and then open, and that would then automatically upload it into there. From there, we can then take that. Next week, you'll be able to share those with others. We'll hopefully be in smaller groups. We'll be listening to each other's recordings, talking through some of the challenges you had, answering questions you may have. You may come up against some brick walls that you will find. But hopefully everything will be possible. And we'll be going through those next week, as I said, and then also following up with what do we do then once our podcasts are complete and our first episodes are ready? How do we get those online? How do we get those onto people's devices, into people's ears, into people's heads, and then making that change that we really want to see? I think that pretty much covers everything for today. I don't know if there are any other questions or answers or thoughts or items people would like to share. We'll also be sharing with you in an email, probably tomorrow, in the next day or two, the recording from today, all of the worksheets again, access to where all these files are, as well as another resources file, which we'll be able to share with you, where there's a lot more content online, especially on how to use Audacity and editing, and also goes into a bit more depth into the issues that we discussed today around, so don't have your phone on when you're doing a podcast editing, because someone will call you and you'll hear it ring. So with that, I would like to thank Chitira. Really great job. Thank Corina for your support, the interpreters, and everyone for joining today. Have a lovely rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.